I hit the point where things kind of imploded. Yeah, I had a big health crisis, divorce, just everything kind of. And I remember thinking at that time, it's like I've got to. There was some voice that said, if you don't have a look, if you don't figure out a different way of being on the planet, you're going to do all this again because you don't know any way of doing it.
Welcome to Ultrahabits. Here, we go under the hood with our guests to unpack the minutiae and to understand what processes and systems they engage or research that result in ultra-enhanced living.
Howdy folks, it is RJ Singh here at Ultrahabits, and we are stoked that you are joining us on another week with another dynamic guest. We are joined by Carter Mcnabb, who's currently Managing Director, Strategy and Consulting, Supply Chain Operations for Accenture, following the acquisition of his firm, GRA, here in Australia in early 2021. GRA is a boutique supply chain consultancy house. Now, Carter is a dynamic man. He's a bit of a rock star in our industry. He makes supply chain cool, in my view. Now, he was at the top of his game. The business was humming. Everything was going swell and well, and GRA was really pumping. This was 2015. From the outside, everything looked unbelievably perfect. But he goes on to say, I was struggling with the competing pressures of work, parenting, relationships, the expectations I put on myself. I often felt isolated in this experience like no one else would or could understand, even though I had an active social and friendship base. This ultimately led me to seek support and discover new ways of being. After getting everything I wanted and seeing it all fall apart, I undertook a journey of self-discovery and transformation with the same vigor I put into building a business. I received incredible support, learned new ways, and experienced possibilities I wasn't able to even imagine before. What looked like a tragedy on the way through ultimately became an incredible gift. Now, Carter is also a recovery and systems invention coach on the national leaderboard of the Mankind Project here in Australia, and recently launched a mentoring service for young men called That Guy with his son Campbell. That Guy aspires to light up young men's lives by providing inspirational and aspirational companionship, advocacy, and support on the journey from boyhood to young man. And its mission and purpose is to create more love, acceptance, and safety in the world by helping boys develop into spiritually, emotionally, and physically healthy young men. Now, the conversations that I have with Carter one-on-one are amazing. Lots of depth, lots of range. We can move from technical to academic to philosophy to spirituality to high performance to parenting. I always feel incredibly stretched at the end of our conversations. And I wanted to expose the Ultrahabits community to this as well, this level of wisdom. For the executive that is striving and climbing, it's great. We all do it. The question is, how do we hold ourselves together? How do we strive yet conduct ourselves with grace and not fall apart? And these are the lessons that we're here to learn today. I will leave you with something Carter said. He goes on to say, I've been inspired to find ways to give back what I received and share what I learned with those who are looking. This is my vocation, whatever I do, breaking the cycles, paying it forward, making it better for those that come after. We'll leave you in the capable hands of Carter. Have a great week, guys. If you haven't, remember to rate this podcast. Your support is what keeps us going. Peace out, guys. Well, Carter, welcome to the Ultra Habits Show. We're super grateful to have you on. I've known you throughout the supply chain industry for some time. You're our resident guru here in Australia. And for those that don't know you, you founded GRA in 1997, a specialist supply chain organization, and you recently sold your firm to Accenture, which most people would know. But today we want to unpack a little bit more about the man. So again, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, RJ.
So Carter, you have a weird and wonderful accent like myself. Why don't you let the audience know where you're from, right? You're obviously not Australian, so where did you initially hail from?
No, not originally. I think I'm getting pretty close to being more years here than over there, though. But yeah, I was born in South Carolina on an Air Force base, and then moved to North Carolina, Colorado, Texas, Chicago, and then here.
What actually brought you here to Australia?
So when I was in Chicago, I was working for an operations research consulting firm that did a lot of work in supply chain optimization systems. The Australian Air Force had picked up their technology, and I'd only been with the company for maybe about a year. But I was very keen to get over it. Just for some reason, I just was like, I really want to go to Australia and do this project. And yeah, I found a way to get over. And I was only meant to be out here for a couple of months, but ended up being here for a year and a half. And over that time, Australia started to feel more like home than Chicago, because I'd only been living in Chicago for about, as I said, 10 to 12 months. Met some really wonderful people, and yeah, decided to stay.
Plus, it's so damn cold in Chicago, but
yeah. Dangerously. I really had,
especially being from the southern states. So, did you fall into supply chain? I know a lot of people typically fall into supply chain. Like, how'd that all happen? Was like that the plan, or was that something that just kind of happened?
No, it's really funny because I don't think I've had a traditional career in the sense that I've never really had a sense for what I wanted to do.
It's interesting.
And yeah, so the way that worked is there was a friend from university whose father had this firm in Chicago, and he had asked his son if he knew anyone else that he thought might be good at this sort of work. And so he gave me a call and said, "You want to give this a try?" I said, "Sure." At that point in time, I really wasn't doing anything. I graduated university with zero plans, and I went to Russia for a little while. I came back and I was, I think I was valet parking at that point. And I was like, sure, I'll go to Chicago and do that, which is kind of like the Australia. I was like, sure, I'll go to Australia and do that. And then, then one day I woke up, I was like, wow, I moved here.
It's like ready, shoot, aim. Just with that, do you?
Yes, and it's what I think the difference is. At least at that point, I was doing things with such enthusiasm. Just and there's a real beauty in that. A real beauty in just being able to completely be present and fully alive in what's being done. And I think that in itself creates a lot of energy. So, I think that's also part of the story of the business being built. Again, it wasn't like I want to be in supply chain because I think it's the best industry to be in. And over the next 15 years, it's going to go crazy. And I found the subject matter really interesting at that point in time. The idea of starting something with some people that I knew, because that's another point I'd like to make, is that I found a GRA with two other founding partners. And I had actually worked with them in the Air Force, so I knew them already. So the idea of kind of starting something, working with people that I knew and liked, and just kind of giving it a go, that in itself was exciting. So that was the plan.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So your piece on not necessarily knowing what you wanted to do and kind of following the ball, I tend to agree with that. There is a thought out there, and obviously language around needing to have really tight plans, 3-year plans, 5-year plans. Like, what's your view on, goals and how concrete they need to be versus kind of flowing?
It's a great question, and my response to that would be it's whatever works. I don't have kind of a fundamentalist view on that. There's a saying in the yogic world, which is where attention goes, energy flows. So I think that the more focused I am on something, and it's interesting that focus can be conscious or unconscious. And I think part of what drove me as GRA got bigger and evolved was more that it was almost like there was some belief that thought that I couldn't do it. And in some ways, it was almost like, this is happening, like this, it's now getting bigger, and this is happening, and so on. So it was almost the opposite in some ways. But that's the funny thing is that was also a very strong belief that had a point of, was more of an unconscious focus as opposed to a conscious focus that serve for a point in time. The way I do things, I mean, I think it's interesting. There's kind of the head-based intelligence, but I think a lot of my, how I kind of steer things, I'm very instinctive. There's sort of, it's an intuition thing. And so my sense is, in some ways, figure out which ocean you want to surf in, but ride the waves that come in, and don't get too fixed on what the ocean is going to look like, or being in that one ocean for the next 10 years. So the way I used to look at it is, it's good to have kind of a vision for where you want to be in 3 to 5 years. And again, that can be as specific as you like or not. For me, I think, if I'm being really honest, I could have been more specific. I think that was an opportunity. I probably could have been more specific in that.
How would that have helped, though? How would that have helped, or how would that have added value?
Just focus, just on, yes, the more clear I am on what serves the mission or purpose, then it's much easier to make decisions and say, that either fits or it doesn't. So yeah, I'd say that I think I could have been better at that. And there was something about, again, it's hard to put a finger on, but there was a period of time at GRA where my sense was, what I think I really brought to that business was kind of a sense of what needed to happen next. And I do say a sense, because it was like, I think we need to expand the offer. We need to change the organizational structure to allow us to grow more, because, we were a smaller business, had a very kind of top-down structure. And, as a small business, being very involved in everything, there's that piece about, how do I now put down those mechanisms that help the business get to this point and kind of let go of that control and take a step back? And it's scary. That can be really scary to transition from a small business where everybody's really intimately connected and involved, to that next phase where it's, in some ways you have to take a step back to allow it to move to that next point. And that can be really tough.
Do you think, in terms of that sense that you just touched on, that an individual can develop that, or it's innate?
The thing is, I want to go to the point around diversity, because I think different things will work for different people. So I know people who are, in some ways, much, that they use kind of emotions as a compass. And emotions often are a compass. So they say anger is it's an emotion. It's in the now. It usually indicates a boundary's been crossed, and it's about action. Whereas grief is typically focused on the past. And it's something about loss, whereas fear is focused on the future. And then the idea of the kind of the sovereign, energy, if you will, and that kind of that really authentic, grounded leadership, it's joy, which is a place of holding space and so on. But what I'm saying is that I think there are kind of tendencies that we all have, or proclivities or inclinations. So mine tends to be a bit more instinctive, like I'm at my best, I feel, when I can really sit in the middle of a situation. And again, it's a felt sense about where to go, and I don't know what that is. And I think it can be developed, to answer your question, in that the better able I am to hear myself, and I say that kind of in the broader eye. So the better any of us are being able to actually hear ourselves, then I think that voice is worth listening to.
You and I've had conversations offline, and it's evident within this conversation that you have a practice and you're a person that seeks to evolve yourself. But let's take it back to when you started GRA, and you started with great intentions, and you were having a good time. How did you personally evolve, or potentially de-evolve, in terms of were you always on this path of realization? How did you get to where you're at now, in terms of these other broader conversations we're having, offline?
Yeah.
Like, I want to know, were you like already on this path, or what happened?
Yeah. That's a great question. Yeah, I think there's a part of me that's always, well, not a part. I mean, I think I've always been a seeker. And they say the thing with seeking is that seekers never know the comfort of conclusions, only the intensity of seeking.
I relate.
Yeah, and so as a kid, I mean, it was the same thing. I just remember as a kid being very, very connected with nature, animals. Quite full of awe and wonder. As a kid, I read the unabridged version of Grimm's fairy tales back to back like 5 times. It's like a 1,200-page book, and that sort of thing. And I don't know. I think there was some, I guess, adapted personality responses to some wounding as a kid. Because that kind of big sensitive heart, that sense of being connected and all that. And then a big part of that for me actually was moving from Colorado, because in Colorado I was in 3rd grade and a kid, and I moved to this suburb in Dallas, Texas, in this particular school, which historically was famous for having a really, really difficult social cohort. And all of a sudden it was like heavy competitive sports, and there was a very strong pecking order and sort of social hierarchy, and I was the new kid in, and so there I kind of took on this, well, something must not be right, because as they say with kids, if you don't fit in, a child will not look at an environment and say, maybe it's the environment that doesn't suit. It's like, there must be something wrong with me because I have to survive and adapt in this environment. Make sense?
Yeah, totally.
So I think then too, as well, there was a whole, what I would say, kind of a consensus reality story about the way life looks. Yeah, you get that from all the movies, all the Disney movies. You get a job, you get married,
find a princess, a prince.
Yeah, and have you ever noticed it in those movies? Like all of those stories, nothing happens after that. Then it's done.
It's like your happiness is now found.
It's finished.
Yeah, it's crazy.
That's it. Yeah, it really is, if you think about it. I mean, and so this is why it's interesting. This theme is kind of popping up. It's this issue of diversity. So there is psychological diversity about people have different orientations for how they actually process information and experience the world. There's also a diversity of choices about how people may choose to live their lives. There can be some danger in that because, well, again, do I stay in the in circle and survive in the tribe, or do I not? But I think what drove me, RJ, is that I got out of university. In some ways, I was like, oh, I don't really have a plan. I'm not sure. What am I going to do? I was going to be a musician for a while, and this sort of thing, and I was like, it's kind of sitting on the couch, and it was very quiet. All of a sudden, all my friends had gone and got jobs. So I was sitting there, and then I got the call from my friend. I was like, great, but again, it was just about sort of throwing myself into it. And for a while, I found that world so fascinating because the company that I went to work for, worked in optimization technology, and I started getting, I didn't really understand computer science, and I started getting really into the physics and the information processing side of it all, and kind of really went down that rabbit hole. And so I found it really fascinating and really interesting, and that passion came through. So then there was kind of at GRA, there was a passion for the work, there was a passion for what we did, and I think that was the drive. I just had enormous energy. I mean, that's what I know about myself when I'm on. Like when I find something that lights me up, it's just beautiful because I just go. It's wonderful. It's not actually that hard. When I'm.
Can I just touch on that? Does that energy sometimes impact the environment negatively? Is there a downside to that energy?
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I love this. This is great. It's not the energy itself. It's what the energy is in service of. So let me explain that. I saw someone post something on Facebook recently that said it was like, hey, men, how do you get in relationship with the dangerous parts of yourself? And what do you do to be in relationship? And my point was, the parts are only dangerous when I'm not in relationship with them. So the part of me that can be manipulative and controlling and abusive and tyrannical and maniacal and all that, I mean, they're all there. my sense is that these days, if those things show up, I get curious. Like if I feel that, it's like, oh, because I know that those are protectors, they're defensive strategies in some way. So the point is, it's if I'm consciously aware of all the parts, then I can choose my response, which means I'm actually very safe because I'm not denying or repressing anything, but I'm choosing consciously. If those parts are repressed, and they will act out in a reactive, unconscious way, and that's when that's dangerous. So the part's not dangerous; it's whether it's conscious or unconscious. So for me, the energy is when the big energy that I do have is in service, is in alignment, and it comes from a place of me being really connected to myself. Yes, it has an impact, but at some point, I don't know. That's funny, RJ. I guess my sense is when I feel really in and that energy's there, I don't sense that it has an impact. But when I use my bigness, because sometimes my defensive strategy sometimes is to hide right out in front, to get right out in the middle, take up space. That's, and then when I do that, people feel small. They don't feel seen because I'm too busy taking up the space. So I don't think the energy itself has an impact because it's a force. It's like gravity or sunlight or something like that. It's just a force, but it's and I think this is what goes back to later. To me, there's a very strong around leadership around this, is because in a leadership role, there is an undue level of rank, power, and privilege, and in a leadership role, when I'm really dropped in and connected to self and safe in myself, then that's the place that I lead and the action comes from. But if I'm stressed, wound up, I put myself under pressure, kind of having trouble dealing with all the high expectations, busy people pleasing, or whatever else it is, then that's then that energy can be dangerous or have an impact.
That was interesting. You caught my sigh.
Yeah.
I relate. And so that's interesting. So it's what is the energy aligned with, and being conscious of using it for powers of good will ensure that I'm operating with grace in my environment and not impacting people adversely and stepping on them. And that's what I take from that. And I think that's brilliant. When you started GRA and now you're starting to accumulate prestige, rank, and an honor and finances, did you struggle with that? Was there any struggle there in terms of, did you go through any personal struggles there when you started to accumulate stuff and like that whole journey?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, great question. Yeah, they got to a point. I think for a long time, RJ, I was really, really busy trying to be somewhere other than I was all the time. But not conscious. I remember sitting, and it was a men's circle, and I remember I was sharing something. This was kind of in the early days before I did some really deeper work on myself. This guy was listening to me. And I remember he looked at me, he said, he was a self-helping guy. He said, Carter, do you trust? I was like, what? I thought he was kidding. I literally was offended by the question. Like, what do you mean? Of course not. What do you? I seriously thought he was kidding. And he was like, okay. He's like, okay. He said, just start using the word more frequently. Just get comfortable with the idea. And then he said, what if there were no mistakes and there was nowhere to get to? And I was just like, yeah, that's exactly what happened to me. It was disorienting. Like it's almost like I went into vertigo for a second. Because at that point, that there was a very strong inner critic, with perfectionistic tendencies, constantly looking for the mistake. Again, it's a defense mechanism. And so that was there. And there was always this other place to get to. And so there was a point, I do remember, when it was a really odd thing, RJ, because I remember kind of getting to a point where, this was a few years ago, where it all looked like everything that I had told myself that I wanted. And this comes back to having goals, by the way. It's also be careful what you wish for, because, how many times have you got exactly what you wanted only to find that it actually wasn't what you really wanted? And this is why I go back to the beingness of it as opposed to the doing, do from the being, as opposed to the way around. But I got to a point where, kind of had all the boxes ticked. And I'm embarrassed to say it, but I had a checklist. There was but I got it. And there was I remember feeling, it was actually a sinking feeling in that moment. I was like, I've got all the things, but.
Do you think you could have achieved the material outcomes that you've achieved today being the person you are now? And I guess what I'm trying to ask is, did those defects serve you?
And thank you. Is it okay if I address the language slightly differently?
Of course.
I think for me, it's important because as I've become more compassionate with myself, I don't see anything. I don't really. I might have used to. There was a time I might have seen a really heavily, drug influenced person on the street and been like, oh, I had a story or something. And now I just think I can only imagine what that person went through. That's what happens now. It's just like, oh boy, I really feel it. So in some ways, I kind of look at a human being as a photographic negative of everything that's happened to them to this point in time. And they say people evolve in a use-dependent manner, like our nervous systems evolve in a use-dependent manner where we sort of take on the shape of our environment. So the way I look at those sorts of things is those things were beautiful protectors at a point in time. But then I have to, I don't have to do anything, but there was a conscious choice to unlearn some of that. And I haven't lost your question, but I just want to speak to this. There was a conscious choice to step out of that, but it was terrifying. Because I didn't know, what do I do? Who am I without all those things? What, it was a whole identity kind of,
Was there an existential crisis?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Got it. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I hit the point where things kind of imploded. I had a big health crisis, divorce, just everything kind of, and in some ways it was just, and I remember thinking at that time, it's like, I've got to, there was some voice that said, if you don't have a look, if you don't figure out a different way of being on the planet, you're going to do all this again because you don't know any way of doing it. And I don't know what that voice was. And I'm like, thanks voice. That was great. That was really helpful. I don't know, so I started having a really good look, but going back to your point, it's a really interesting one, because it comes back to this, what's success? And I remember, one is all the status, all the things. I'm not saying that isn't, but there's another one. I heard somebody once, I know this is hard for me at times and hard for a lot of people I know, but someone said, if you can go through a completely ordinary day in a completely ordinary way and feel joy, that's it. And I think from that perspective, it doesn't matter what I have or do as long as that's true. But how much of the striving is about doing, because I think when I get there, I'm going to be this way that I'm not right now. Then I'll be okay. Then I'll feel self-confident. Then I'll feel secure. Then I'll have then the inner critic will stop. Doesn't work that way.
I think it's important to realize that the striving in this kind of functional life, will not satisfy this spirit, and one is time bound and one is not, right? These are the complexities that we're overlaying, in terms of what your previous comment about the ordinary day, how do we achieve that space whilst we juxtapose that with the striving that's occurring in our functional life? That's the $1 million, probably the $1 billion question, right? Because you and I, for the audience, they weren't privy. We had an offline conversation, and I said to you, Carter, I said, well, look, we all look to you, and we look up to you in the industry, and it's like now you're at the mountaintop, and it's like, it's easy enough to say that, but how about for us that are still trying to, because you and I were talking about the definition of success, and you're much more you have a much more broad and I suppose there's a depth of spirit within that definition. But for the audience out there that's still trying to grind, how do they take that, then implement it into their daily striving? And I think that's really what you're touching on. And I think you're very careful because it's a complex overlay, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's it. There is, and it's, I don't know why I'm just going to tell the story as it's popped in. But, when I started doing a lot of the personal development, I mean, these terms all come with their own kind of perceptive overlay in the sense that how they're perceived by, so as soon as I say the word personal development, transformation, spirituality, it comes with a whole bunch of baggage. And look, and the best definition, I've heard of what enlightenment or spirituality is just seeing things as they really are. And that I can take that's not, it's easy to say, it's a very different thing to do. And it's not a doing either. And I'd say at best I've had maybe a glimpse of it here and there. But the thing is, at one point I was like, you know what, all the stuff I used to do, kind of what I got up to wasn't really helpful for me anymore. So I'm going to go try some of this. And at the time, and I'm not kidding, RJ, at the time when I got into that stuff, my thought process was, they seem like nicer people. They treat themselves better. They're really friendly. I don't think any of this stuff really works, but I'm just going to go do that because it's better than doing what I was doing over here. And I remember, it was one of those moments where I remember I was leaving again. It was one of these, this men's circle, and I was driving. I was about to turn right, and my son had called me at that point, and I sort of pressed the button to take the call, but I didn't put on my indicator to turn right. And so the guy behind me, and he pulls up next to me and just rolls down the window and screaming, And I remember looking at this guy, and what actually happened. This is the process that what I went through. I went, and I know what that's like. I said, like, this poor guy, he must be really, really struggling and suffering. And then I went, did I just do that? And then I was grateful that the universe gave me an opportunity to do that totally different, because 10 years before I'd have been right back at that guy. And then I would have talked to everybody about it who would have listened for the next 3 days about this. You know what I mean? And,
yeah.
This guy, can you believe it? I'm just, And so it was like, no, this is working. It's actually happening. So I'm kind of even below my conscious awareness, things were starting to shift. So, I don't know how it works. I don't know why some people decide to look at this and some do and some don't. All I know is of all the things that I've tried, I just know that this piece of getting in relationship with self works. That's it.
Well, that there was, you said something interesting about, treating ourselves better, right? Like, how often do we hear that, right? Like there's such there's a massive view on how we should treat others better, and we all have those conversations. But when it comes to self-care and treating ourselves better, it's interesting language. So you're now at Accenture, and you're surrounded by.
Can I speak to that real quick?
Of course.
This is What's your view? How would you define misogyny?
Interesting question. I would define it as a subtle and non-subtle form of male domination over people, places, environment, and things. I think that's how I would term it.
Yeah, great. No, thank you. Yes, and to add to that, consider the possibility that misogyny is the repression of the feminine in any gender.
Yeah.
So in other words,
In regard, irrespective of whether it's male or female. Yeah.
misogyny can happen in a female-bodied person. It's a repression of the feminine. So this is a big topic, because this comes down to, because I think the corporate world is still largely a very it's male dominated in terms of that energy, but it sometimes can be. And if you think about, there's kind of the conscious masculine, which is can be a very beautiful protective, supportive, directive, but it's an energy of space holding and presence. But the immature masculine is the tyrant.
Mm-hmm.
It's the petty tyrant. And tyranny again comes down to, it's the repression of something, right? So if I'm repressing the feminine, if, like, in other words, I don't allow myself self-care, it's not okay to show up in a bad way. I can't be afraid. I can't be vulnerable. I can't. And then that's what I bring to work. Then that's where I think a lot of this comes from, And so to me, the narrative around leadership is around welcoming the whole person. It doesn't mean don't perform. It doesn't mean, because we still got to get on and do things. I woke up today for some reason, I don't know why, just feeling a ton of grief in my body, bunch. And there's a part of me that was like, I don't want to show up for this calls. I want to be awesome and on, and and I was like, no, but I can hold that. I know how to hold that part of myself and still show up. So I didn't repress it. I just acknowledged it, and still was able to, and I'm acknowledging it now, and that's okay. There it is. So I think that there's a really big piece in, I think what I'm hoping the future of leadership looks like in the corporate world is this idea of leadership is about, number one, it's not a title. You don't get to, and it is in the corporate world. But if you look at it, it's a role in the field that I pick up when it suits the greater good of the tribe. And I put it down when it doesn't, So in other words, I don't want it to calcify into my ego structure and identity, because then that's tyrannical. Then it's like, no, I've got to be I've got to be that guy. Yeah. So leadership, it's a role in the field. It's a dance. It's a movement. Number one. Number two, it's about, how do I be in that role? So the being is, I'm going to say, more important than the doing. Because if I take my kids to soccer practice and I'm stressed and annoyed and kind of crappy about it, that's not helping anybody. It's not helping them. It's not helping me. But if I do it in a really good way, like it's a real act of service, then it's beautiful. It's not the thing. It's where it comes from. And that third piece then is welcoming the whole human. Because I kind of go back, why do any of us work? And this is a bigger question. I'd like to think, aren't I trying to make it better for the next group, the next lot? Honestly, all the time, no. I'm not doing that all the time. I'd like to think that, but that's a work in process. Yeah, there's still identity and stuff in it for me, but working on it. But the thing is that if I'm in a workplace that is extractive and harmful to humans, then what do those humans go back and put back into their family systems? And I don't have an answer for that, RJ. But part of the answer is having a conversation in a forum like this, and hopefully getting that message out there and saying it's okay that this is where this has got to go. This is where it's got to go.
I find what you just said about shared leadership and how we view it as a role versus allowing it to calcify into our ego and our being. I think that's really interesting. Have you seen that play out within organizations where there's a really loose structure, and at any given point, the junior person can step up as the leader and call out the leader? And how have you seen that play out? Or is that still the holy grail in your view?
I've seen it in organizations. I personally haven't seen it in corporate organizations, if you will. I've seen it where people can take initiative and where innovation is possible because psychological safety is present. But there's so many, that question's got a lot of layers to it because even the, I'd like to think we were getting more and more there at GRA, which is we started to create intentional spaces for that sort of stuff to happen. And again, there has to be some real awareness about people being. It has to be by invitation. You have to be very clear about the roles. There's a lot to do to make that safe, because as soon as you start mixing what someone does for work to survive effectively and emotional vulnerability and so on, that just needs to be done with a lot of care. That's all, just care. But I've seen places like Google did the research, and Google said that the thing they found that was the number one factor for innovation was psychological safety. The number one thing.
That's interesting, because in season 1 of our show, that was the theme that came up continuously when we interviewed military elite, academics, business leaders, and it was quite surprising. We actually found a firm in Brisbane. We wanted to get the founder on. She measures it, right? She has this kind of technology to measure it. And it was obvious when you thought about why psychological safety is important for innovation. But it wasn't obvious to me, before the conversations for some reason. You know what I mean? I interested, I just to speak personally, this piece on misogyny and this male energy or over masculine energy dominating the space. I've thought about that with myself, and I look at my career. I'm in supply chain, which is primarily male dominated still, as you know. But I was thinking, and it was kind of bugging me the other day, I've never closed a deal or made a deal with a female customer. And I was thinking about that and reflecting how much of that is because of my style. Like, am I over masculine? Do I push? Is there any level of misogyny in my approach, or is it an industry thing? And to be honest, I haven't figured it out yet. I mean, I've been in the industry a long time making deals, but I haven't yet been able to really create value with a female on the other side of the table. And to be 100% honest, I don't know if that's my style or the industry, but I actually think it might be partly my style because of just this over inflation of masculine energy, which I feel, because women that have gotten to a place of decision making have probably had to contend with this energy, repel from. And I've questioned myself as to, am I actually guilty of that?
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. No, appreciate you sharing that. So what I'm hearing in that is, so if I've heard you correctly, you have been in situations where you've been in a selling situation with a female, and you're saying that none of those closed, and you're wondering if it's something about your approach that the other person finds repelling or repulsive. Is that?
Yeah, or overly aggressive or assertive.
Yeah.
And it's just something I've been reflecting on lately, to be honest with you, because partly why I'm reflecting on that is we had actually our guest who's being released on the podcast this week. He's a PhD from the Naval War Academy in the US, Dr. David Smith, and he's written multiple books on why men should intentionally mentor women, right? And he's written a book called Athena Rising, and it's very, very, the stats are there as to why men should get interested in their female counterparts' development. And it had me thinking about how I relate to women in the workplace and then in my career in general. I suppose that's why it's quite topical.
So it's interesting because, I mean, this, in some ways, this comes down to, look, I'll just say it. There's also I think there's what I would call a consensus reality narrative about relationships and sexuality that's very outcome objective based. So think about that for a sec. So sit with that idea that the person's looking at me on the other side of the table just wants something from me in the future. So there's that. And then there's another piece, which is just to say, it's funny, I had a couple of the young team members at GRA years ago asked me to do, like, how do you sell? I was like, that's a great question. Don't really know. But I sat with it, and I sat with it, and I said, I said, how do you sell? And one of the guys said, I tell them about the benefits of the product and this, and I said, yeah. So that's good. Like, what else could you try? Well, I could do this, and it's like, yeah. Okay. Well, what else? But what's a different way of having a conversation? What's a way of showing someone that you're really curious about what's happening for them? Like what their needs and wants are. I could say, and I just kept asking questions until they went, "Oh, ask questions." I was like, yeah. So it's like in a relationship. So I said, any relationship, there has to be an element of attraction or desire, and then there has to be love. And the attraction or desire, that's demonstrated through a real deep curiosity in the other. Mm-hmm. And there's intrigue and excitement and variety, and there's all that sort of stuff that happens in that space. And then the love is it's the certainty, and it's the safety, and it's the trust, and that's how a healthy long-term relationship is built. Yeah. And you've got to keep putting the desire and the curiosity in that as well, so that they kind of, it's a self-reinforcing thing. So what I would, if you're open to the invitation, is to, have a look at the situations you've been in, and firstly get curious about yourself. Like what story am I running when I'm sitting across? Because I think the one thing I will say about female-bodied people, women, is that I believe, and again, there's a neuroscience basis to this, which is the nervous system isn't myelinated to the same level, and the reason for that is it's basically so a gestating infant can actually feel the environment through the mother's body, and so there's a much greater felt sense. So if you have self-doubt and you've got like the inner critic running about, maybe I'm not doing this right, maybe I'm dangerous, then that's in the field, it's picked up. So the first thing is with the invitation is to get really curious about what's happening for you. What's the story I'm running? What's going on here? And when I get in relationship with the part of me that's doing that, then and only then can I actually listen to the other person. So this whole idea about there was something about holding space that I learned in Mankind Project, and I never learned this in leadership development anywhere in the corporate space. And what they said is that if you're speaking to someone and they say something and you take it personally at any level, you're no longer listening to them. You're now back in here. You're in your own thing. So even if someone says something that triggers your stuff or brings something up, it's being able to hold that and see that without it letting it become the vision. Does that make any? I don't know if that makes sense.
Makes when I was just talking to my sponsor in AA about that. Like, right now at home, we've got babies, young ones. We're tired. We're trying to buy a house here, and there's a lot of stress. And I'm noticing I'm taking things personally at home with my wife, and we already have different styles of communication. I'm being an American, I don't do well with sarcasm, cultural nuances, but we know that. But still, we're taught in recovery that when I'm disturbed, something's wrong with me, right? Like, it's not necessarily what the person's saying or doing. And I'm very much aware to what you're saying, that like I'm in this place right now, in this moment, in this relationship that with my wife, of oversensitivity. And I'm acutely aware of that. And because I'm there when she says something, I then get lost in the content, story that I'm creating about what she's saying versus actually being fully present and there.
Yeah.
So yes, that is 100% rings true and hits home for me. Yeah.
Yeah. And when I'm not looking after myself, all that that stuff in me comes back up too. Like if I'm not looking after myself too much, whatever. What I try to do these days is when something kind of is running, I try to kind of work my way back. Where was the first micro abandonment? Where did I leave myself, and where did I leave myself again?
Micro abandonment. That's a good one.
Yeah. Well, what happens is, I'll do that. I'll do that in intimate relationships. Sometimes not. But there's a thing about speaking the truth, but speaking it from a place of love, which generally looks like, the other person can feel it, and it usually starts with me saying I. As soon as I say you, we're on. So it's that idea of self-responsibility, and as soon as I say, if I say you, then the other person, I've studied this. The neurological response is already in a defensive posture. So that makes sense.
Oh, yeah, 100%. I think that's why it's always better. And it's within the primary relationship, there's the most appetite for button pushing, I would suppose to say, like the primary romantic relationships that we're in. And, the way we communicate in those relationships, especially when we're in disagreement, I think is super critical. The language we use, I, we, you, these are very, very important.
Yeah. Well, in intimate relations, you generally will find yourself in a pairing that reflects the way your parents, one of the, it may not be both parents, but one of your parents, how they regulated the nervous system. So in other words, we tend to seek that because that's what we know. So do you ever find that interesting?
Yeah. And, there's a lot of upside with my parents' relationship, and there's a lot of downside. And,
more the relationship between you and your primary caregivers in terms of how they dealt with your feelings of distress.
Yeah, that's a whole book, isn't it?
There are books about it. There are many books about it. I think it's pretty. There's some pretty simple models for it, but it's actually really good to be aware. Like they call it attachment styles, if you're familiar with this. So there's like a secure attachment, there's an anxious attachment, and an avoided attachment style. And you generally find that you tend to get anxious and avoidant in pairs in relationships. And they approach the same exact situation with an opposite approach, which typically triggers the other person's trauma story. Yeah. Anyway, that is a whole other thing to unpack. We could do that another time, but I guess what it comes back to is, again, it's that how do I speak my truth in a really healthy, loving way that doesn't have the fear running, and how do I do it earlier in the piece so that I don't build up little bits of resentment that all come out, boom,
Yeah. I get that. So I want to move the conversation to where you're at now. So you're with Accenture. You're exposed to some of the probably, I would assume, some of the youngest and dynamic minds out there. And for someone like yourself that I know likes to impart, you have a lot to impart. How are you finding that journey now of exposure to so many people, so many initiatives? We know Accenture's, well into a diverse approach. Are you enjoying that? Are you finding scope in terms of being able to develop people and have more of these conversations?
Yeah, it's a great question. Accenture does some things in terms of its diversity and inclusion agenda is brilliant, and that it doesn't just talk about it, it actually does it. And it's one of the few organizations I've seen that really, it's backed significantly. It's looked at, it's measured, it's talked about, it's adjusted. It changes the recruiting priorities and focus. It's brilliant. It really is brilliant. And that also goes to things like relationship styles, sexual preferences. So LGBTQ, there's a big community there as well. And there are forums in work hours around that sort of stuff, which is Yeah, exactly. It's wonderful. I got in there. It got so busy. I was starting to feel like a lot of the interactions were very transactional, and so I kind of went into a little bit of it's this. And then I decided, well, I'm not going to buy that. I could get pulled under the waves by that, but I just went, no, I'm not going to do it. And so I started reaching out and found something in Accenture called the Healthy Minds Network, and I'm presenting on polyvagal theory to
Wow.
And again, polyvagal theory, it's a great model because it's scientifically based and backed. It's about nervous system regulation. I think an incredible tool for awareness and leadership, navigating situations. Because when I become dysregulated, so move into fight or flight or collapse, basically my PFC, prefrontal cortex, goes offline, which means I have no access to my skills or creativity or capabilities. All my learned goodness goes away, and I move into binary, survival-based thinking. And in high pressure, high stress environments, people are often kind of just on the border of fight or flight all the time. So it's about, how do I re-regulate, come back? And again, psychological safety in myself means I'm more creative and innovative and so on. So I kind of use that to bring these ideas into a corporate space, because it isn't woo, it's scientifically based. But the funny thing is, they've done a bunch of research on things like yogic practices and so on, and actually have now proven they do completely downregulate the nervous system. So they do work. But yeah, so I guess what I found at a place like Accenture is that I really had to kind of test my own beliefs about what can I create. So am I going to let myself go into a victim story, or am I going to really lean into the big current and hold fast? And so I just I stepped in and started saying, this is what I'm going to make important. And whilst doing all the other things, by the way, this isn't like I stopped doing this, but I'm just going to make sure I make this important, because it's exactly who who I want to be and what I want to do. And if it doesn't work out, then that's the information I needed.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that you're being in a big firm, in a firm like that, there's so much potential impact that someone like you can make in terms of your experience and your business and your life experience. I think that's the massive upside for the world in many ways, in terms of the world that you're in. Before we wrap this up, I know that you have a practice and you're pretty structured around your personal development and your spirituality. Would you share some of your practices, some of your habits, some of the things that you do that set you up for being able to navigate life on a daily basis and those challenges that come with it?
Yeah, wow. That's been a big journey. I mean, I think this is so funny because, 6 or 7 years ago when I had that, as you called it, the existential crisis, I had a bath for the first time since I was like 8 years old.
Interesting.
And I remember the idea of having a bath was what?
Waste of time. Yeah.
Waste of time, and just kind of even felt weird, just sitting there doing nothing in the water, Gosh. Yeah. So yeah, it's been quite a journey on this front. So in the morning I've got it's about a 2.5 hour practice that involves various things. So there's various kind of stretching, so I do the lacrosse ball on the bottom of the foot. There's some sort of spinal stretches, do some lower back exercises. I jump on a little mini trampoline for about 10 or 15 minutes. I do meridian tapping, so on various points where we've got clusters of nerves, and that kind of gets basically just creates impulses that kind of move through the body and get things fired up. Do sequences of numbers and midline crossing stuff. We'll then have a shower, and then I've got about an hour-long Kriya yoga practice. So Kriya yoga is more on the energy system, and it's more inwardly focused. Again, that is a whole nother story. But yeah, so the two very structured practices that I learned through Sadhguru. So he's the head of the Isha Foundation and so on. But I mean, that's been amazing, because I got to say, I've been doing it for a couple of years now. And when I started doing it at the start, it was great. But these days, it's the ability to see inside my own body, and I go, okay, this is what's going on today. I can see my mind's a little bit busier. Oh yeah, 'cause I'm a bit tired, so that thing's kind of running a little bit more. And it's not just the posture, but it's like, oh, my shoulders, like my shoulders will tend to kind of tense up. My body will contract and kind of, and I can, in the practice now, I've got it to the point where I can just kind of keep my shoulders down. And it sounds like it's such a small thing, but you've got, I mean, those subtle changes, what that can do for your, the chemical composition in your body, the hormonal structure, what's going, I mean, it's amazing, RJ. So, so I do that every morning, and yeah, that completely sets me up. And for me, it's a non-negotiable. It's just like, I will do that every day, because like, I mean, the difference is profound, like profound. Yeah. So that's a big part of it. Sometimes at night, yeah, another thing is if I'm feeling a bit wound up, I've got one of those weighted blankets. You ever tried one of those?
No.
I'll send you a link, man. They're like these blankets that have these tiny little glass beads in them. But the idea being is they put pressure on the body. And again, just a little bit of pressure across the body, again, tells your nervous system you're being held. It's really relaxing and really calming. Yeah, bunch of things, my friend. I mean, like, again, we could do a whole nother show on that. But you know, just learned a bunch of things about again, self-care. You know, how to take care of myself, and because at the end of the day, when I'm in that space, I know that's the space I'm in for my kids, and I'm not in that space. I just also want to be really clear. I've got nothing figured out. I'm not 100% anything. You know what I mean? Like this is just every day I do it a little bit better. And some days I go back a little bit and I do better in those days by forgiving myself more quickly.
Isn't that interesting? It's not necessarily doing better, but it's being gentler and forgiving ourselves and more accepting. And just with your routine, I would say that it's quite different than most of the conversations we have. And I really relate to what you're doing, although I don't do it, because I personally, given my registic tendencies and my energy, I have this subtle anxiety throughout the day. And it's like, there's something that's why I think I drink hot water all day. I drink gallons of it. Like I'm just always seeking to calm my internal system down. And I might unpack some of that with you offline, because I think that you would probably be the same. And there's a lot I can learn from you around that, because my nervous system and my energies are never really aligned. I'm either pushing myself far beyond the kind of the boundary of the physical norm, or I'm internally kind of exhausted. And I'm generally moving between those two, and to find more of a baseline would probably be the go, man. So
I used to say balanced was a state I would pass through rapidly twice a year, from one extreme to the other.
Oh man, I get that. No.
Yeah. No, let's do it. That chat. It's there is a lot of really good stuff around that, and I do relate. And like I said, it's an ongoing thing for me too. You know, how to kind of come down a little bit. That's okay. And I think the great thing about having, I mean, I've got a couple people I work with, like one of my other partners. He's just one of these guys who, like, I mean, to me, he's incredibly inspiring in the sense that he just chooses, as he says, he just chooses to be happy. He hasn't done any of this sort of work, but he's just kind of there. You know, it's like, I don't know a few people like that. What he's told me is he's really good with people, but he doesn't. But what he doesn't necessarily know how to work with the underlying stuff, because he hasn't had a lived experience of having gone through it. So for me, like, and this is why I thank you for your honesty and just showing up so transparently about your story and kind of where you're at. And again, that's hugely permission giving. So, like, thank you. And I think one of the gifts of going through something like this and being in a position where, it can be shared, is that's the give back. My point is that I used to say that, like, my ego was so funny because I used to always have this idea that I was supposed to be somewhere other than where I was. And so then I started thinking about that and going, oh, that's interesting. So I was, if we look at the scientific view, the universe has been around about like sort of 14 billion years. And I'm kind of at the tip of it at this point in time, and I'll be around for a millipoofteenth of nothing of it. And yet somehow I know better than the thing that created and involved me where I'm supposed to be in it. And then I started to realize that maybe, like, here, actually, this is where I'm meant to be right now, because I am. I mean, there's nothing to argue with. So then it's, how do I make this moment as beautiful and as good as it could possibly be? Just this moment, and then the next one and the next one. And so for me, the work and the give back these days is kind of, as much as I can, to try to, I look at it like this, you take a bed sheet and you shake it and like a wave goes through. Does that make sense? When you do that with a sheet. So think of it like this. I like to think of it like all of the patterns, the pain or suffering, trauma, or whatever you want to look at it, that gets passed down through family lines and ancestry. And so at the moment, that wave, that energy, that field is in me. Like it's connected, like it's in this world through me at the moment. And if I can change my shape when it's in me, in other words, if I can do something to just take a little bit of the edges off, it's going to get passed on just a little bit smoother, a little bit kinder. And there's no awards. I don't get, but like, think of the impact that has. And I think the thing is, it doesn't matter in some ways what I do, as long as if I'm doing that in whatever situation I'm in, then that's it. That's the work.
I appreciate that. And I think what we'll do is we'll leave it there, Carter. I really want to appreciate you and thank you for the time that you've given us today. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.